Hello and welcome to Dual Citizens. My name is David Ould.
And my name is Stephen McAlpine, and in Dual Citizens, we're exploring the intersection of the world of Christianity and our secular culture, where those things clash. And that's what we're going to be looking at today on some major topics. How are you going today, Dave, over there in Sydney?
I'm doing all right in Sydney. How are you going, Steve? You almost missed your cue there. You doing all right?
I'm doing okay, I think. I'm in sunny Christchurch. It is sunny and cold, so I do feel like a dual citizen because I'm living between two worlds. Half of the stuff looks Australian.
We are milking this dual citizen stuff. Not only we've got the dual citizen things going on, we're in two different countries as well. This is the extent we go to for you, dear listener and viewer. What are we going to be talking about this week on Dual Citizen, Steve?
Well, as I'm looking afar from across the pond, we're looking at further afield, the CAS review on rapid-onset gender dysphoria in the UK, the review that came out looking at how the gender ideology had been pushed onto young people and how that's been shut down in the UK. And then we're looking at a terrible series of events here in Australia that had global repercussions, I think, or shockwaves. Stabbings with people dead in Bondi Junction in Sydney. And then just not long after that, another stabbing, which seemed to be religiously motivated, live on air of a religious leader during a live streaming. So big things there. But we're going to start today with our perennial favourite, David, the Australian Law Reform Commission's report on religious discrimination. It's the gift that keeps on giving.
It's not going away, and neither are we. Let's get cracking.
Well, first up, Dave, we have the Australian Law Reform Commission and that ongoing report about religious discrimination, especially affecting schools. And it's been a bun fight, really, in Parliament about the issue of can schools positively discriminate, and that language wasn't being used. Is there a positive way to have faith leaders in their schools, all Christian, or people who are teaching in their school all Christian? And the report came out really spiky, but just recently, Justice Rothman, who was the leader of that report, says it within the brief that he was given, he said a few things, but something more is going on. What did he say about the changes that might actually be helpful for us?
Sure. So Justice Rothman gave a speech at Notre Dame University, I think last Friday, where he said, look, it's not really as bad as some people think it is. He came out as a person of religious faith, which of course he is. And he said, look, the report that I gave was based on the constraints that I was given. I was asked to look at Section 38 of the Sex Discrimination Act and related things there. What we didn't deal with, but we mentioned is going to happen, is the flip side of the coin, which is some form of positive rights in a religious freedoms bill. And so his basic argument was, look, we can have that. We can assert some positive rights, and that will deal with the protections which have kind of been taken away as our exemptions from the Sexual Discrimination Act have been taken away. Just to remind our viewers and listeners, the current situation in Australia is basically you can't discriminate against somebody on the basis of sex and sexuality and all that kind of stuff, and that's set out in the Sex Discrimination Act, except for Section 38 when you are allowed to discriminate against them. And so at the moment we've got what you might say is an exemption from the bar on discrimination. And what Rothman is arguing is, well, we dealt with that side and here's how we deal with it. But what we could do now is set up some what we might call positive rights to put in place.
Yeah, you use the word positive rights there, Dave,
Yeah.
and I think the word discriminate in our modern culture is like a hand grenade. You roll it down the aisle and boom, you can't discriminate against anyone for anything.
That's right.
So people who are opposed to this, and I wonder why the Attorney General, Mark Dreyfus, hasn't given a wider brief. It seems a bit disingenuous to me. But some might say that this is about the freedom to discriminate. We're allowing you to be bigots. Is that the case? Is it as simple as that?
Well, when it does come down, doesn't it, to the use of that word? I mean, the broader sense of the word discriminate, we all discriminate in various ways. You've discriminated this morning in your choice of shirt to wear. I'm not going to comment
Positively,
on
I
your
might add.
on your sartorial choices, but we discriminate all the time. I discriminate about who I let into my house when I close the door in the evening. I don't just let all and sundry come in. I discriminate at church on the things I allow to happen and not allowed to happen. But that tighter sense of acting in a prejudiced way against somebody because of who they are, that's what we hear by that. And I think probably one of the problems has been that our position at the moment has been accurately described as the right to discriminate, where otherwise the
Yes.
law says we wouldn't be able to do it. So, but what's really going on, and what the experts in the field recognize, is what you've actually got is a case of competing rights. So you've got the right of some people not to be discriminated against, but also on the other side, we've got now what Rothman is calling these, and others are calling these positive rights, which is the right of you and I, for example, to do church in a certain way and employ the right sort of people for that, but also in the schools that we're in to have make a choice about who is going to be in that school, who's going to teach, who's going to be in charge, what standards of behavior we expect. And so on. So it's actually helpful, I think, to move the language away from the language of discrimination into rights. The problem is that second
Our opponents
piece
don't
of the
want us to
puzzle.
do that, right?
Well, the problem is, I think, more that the second piece of the puzzle just hasn't been put in place yet. We keep talking about the need for this bill, but we're not seeing anything at all. And ultimately, even if you do put it in place, I think you're still going to end up in this position where you have these overlapping claims of rights. So ultimately, when someone who is sort of openly and proudly homosexual wants to get a job in a religious school, you've still got this locus, this space where these two rights are coming into conflict. Well,
So,
can there be a solution to that?
Dave, yeah. What I want to put on that one is there any way to untie the Gordian knot of that? Because it feels like oil and water. You've got two opposing visions of what human flourishing is, and both are saying the other one isn't right. It won't lead to human flourishing. Something has to give, and it feels like some right in the end is going to be more equal than the other right. It feels like that's the direction we're going. That's why the Prime Minister's in a bind, right?
And in one sense, it always has to be that way. When you've got rights, one is always going to win. I mean, I was talking to a lawyer earlier today, and he was going, "Oh, I don't like the usual of winning." I said, "Well, someone's going to end up losing, aren't they?" So there it is. There is a solution, and hot off the press this morning on ABC's Religious and Ethics webpage, Professor Patrick Parkinson, who's a long-time chair of Freedom for Faith here in Australia, he suggested I was going to say a novel solution, but I cheekily want to suggest it's one that I suggested a long time ago on my blog. But it's this: so stop talking about religious rights and whatever. Let's assert a general right of freedom of association. So people ought to be allowed to associate together according to a common interest or belief and regulate themselves according to that. And then other people don't get to come inside that association and impinge upon it. So a school gets to regulate itself as it wishes. A political party, always worth reminding the politicians of this, the political parties get to regulate themselves as they wish. And I don't expect Mark Dreyfus, the Attorney General, to be forced to employ a card-carrying member of the Liberal Party, let alone a rabid Conservative, as his chief of staff. That would be unfair to him. So why should he expect any the less from us? But if you assert just that right to freedom of association, and fall back on the mantra, don't like Christian schools, it's okay. Don't get Christian schooled, that's okay. But let Christian schools and any other organization organize themselves as they wish. Hands off, leave us alone.
Yeah, that will be interesting. It does seem like it could be boring lawyer stuff if you first look at it, but underneath that, there's a lot of iceberg under that tip, isn't there?
There is, and this is actually fundamentally important stuff. So I'm not a lawyer; I am the son of a lawyer, and this stuff does occasionally interest me. But it's actually, I don't think there's a more important issue going on today, actually, for our common life. This is going to impact upon schools, on churches, but actually even more broadly on how we understand ourselves as a nation, where we all get on together, and we all, despite our differences, have the spaces where we can actually be be different and allow each other to believe different things and hold other points of view without forcing each other into being bent one way or another. So fundamentally important. I think Christians need to be continuing to pray, taking an interest, answer the public surveys, write to your politicians. This one is not going to go away, and they will still be measuring the weight of the printed emails when they come. And as we've mentioned at the start, it's the gift that keeps on giving, and we're going to keep unwrapping it whenever it presents itself, aren't we? Right?
I'm sure it's going to come around again, as it normally does.
And again, and again, not least because the lawyers have still got bills to pay. So, news out of the United Kingdom. Dame Hilary Cass has completed her report, the aptly named Cass report, into gender treatment for gender dysphoria, particularly amongst teenagers, in the National Health Service. They asked her to do a report, and she's produced it, and it has kicked up a bit of a stink. She's effectively said much of the practice that we're seeing and the care actually doesn't really have much significant scientific basis to it. The research just isn't holding it up. Maybe we ought not to be doing as much of it, and that's not contentious at all. That wouldn't have kicked up a stink. What's it all been about, Stephen?
Well, obviously, the history of it goes back to the Tavistock Centre, Tavistock Clinic in the UK, which, with the whole rise of what people would say is a social contagion among young women in particular, with rapid onset gender dysphoria. And what had happened was that the clinicians at the clinic were being told, and parents were being told, affirm first and offer gender therapy that is along the lines of gender transition, which is drugs, so testosterone for girls, interventionist surgery, top and bottom surgeries, things like that, especially the drug issue. And it had become so heated and so complex and so questioned that the Times got involved, and some great reporting over the last few years and brave reporting in the face of activists saw the government shut down the Tavistock Centre, and the reports just come out from Hilary Cass about this issue, and it's devastating, really.
It is, and there was a prominent legal case, wasn't there, a number of years ago? Just run us through that one, Steve, because that was almost the watershed moment, wasn't it? The catalyst moment that unplugged the dam and moved it all.
A young woman who transitioned and been encouraged to transition in her early 20s decided that that was wrong. Technically, she lost the case, but lost the battle, but won the war on this one, bringing up the issue of now that she feels stuck in a halfway house, because what they haven't been telling you is that this is not reversible.
You can't undo it. Yeah.
The ideology was driving it, not the science. And Cass's report shows that there's very little medical evidence to say that this will solve people's issues long term. In fact, quite the opposite, that rates of suicide don't go down, that there's no proof that these drugs are helpful, and there's plenty of proof that they're harmful. At the same time, parents were being hidden away from what was going on with their own children's lives. It looked like it's statism 101, and somewhere along the line, sanity has prevailed. And the government in the UK has taken hold of this. Shamefully, the government in Australia is dragging its heels.
So sanity appears to have partially prevailed in the UK, at least at that state level. But there's Twitter, shock horror. I'm surprised, got a bit agitated about the whole thing. J.K. Rowling and others. J.K. Rowling did her whole what's been going on as the Twitterati have got to it? What sort of responses have we seen around the debate?
So what you've got the political, medical, scientific issue, and on the other hand, you've got this 500-pound gorilla called culture and the culture wars. And you've got J.K. Rowling, who's got enough money to say whatever she likes. She probably burns money to keep her Scottish castle warm. And she's saying, see, I told you, and you, Daniel Radcliffe, and you fellow Hogwartian actors, you will apologise to me eventually when you see the train wreck that happens to young people. And, of course, there's a pile on Twitter from people saying, leave trans people alone, you're hateful. And the question isn't around hate, though I don't think that I would come out as narky, I think, towards people in the same way that she does. She can be a
It
bit
wasn't a
spiky.
precision. It wasn't a precision response for her, was it? I mean, she did the
No.
blunderbuss scatter
Yeah. And
approach.
I just don't think I just don't. I think you've got to be careful in that territory. But she's, there's such a thing as a graceless winner at times, right?
Yeah,
And perhaps she's being a little bit that, because I would want to say, let's be very careful how we treat other human beings. And
yeah,
she isn't the friend of Christians, because she just knocks Genesis 1 and 2 out of the park as well, and says it's not how women are to be understood
yeah,
either. Well, we believe
yeah.
it is. So I'd be very careful. But at the same time, there's pushback and hate towards her from the cultural framework that sees the trans issue is a way to self-identify and loose yourself from the surly bonds of your own physicality and be who you really think you are. And that will take a lot longer to untangle than a scientific framework that says we're not going to give drugs. People are going to get those drugs online anyway.
The shifting of those cultural foundations as those moorings, that's already happened. This is perhaps reflecting on the fact that maybe it's all gone a bit wrong, but not here in Australia. So here in Australia, it took the press a number of days to even report on this, and that's fascinating in and of itself. Could we expect maybe to see some shifting here in Australia? Could we see a hitting of the brakes on these things? And if not, why not?
Well, between the two countries we're in, the Australian and New Zealand Royal Society of Psychiatrists has already said put the brakes on. And
Yeah.
psychologists are starting to say we don't want to see young trans patients.
Yeah.
Interesting, because they're saying we don't want to get sued either way. We don't want to be hassled by the psychological board, who is very affirming, and we don't want to be sued by parents or medical practitioners down the line or young people. So what you end up getting is that young people who perhaps have a whole spectrum of other issues, including autism issue coming to the surface, are not going to be seen by clinicians because of this ideological push, because clinicians were afraid to take them on. And that's a travesty that ideologues would use young people for their own cause and then not see through their actual medical conditions. Absolute travesty. So perhaps I'm getting a bit like J.K. Rowling, and I need a billion-seller book to be able to protect myself from what I really feel.
Possibly. It just occurs to me as we were talking, we do ultimately have an evidence-based approach here in Australia, don't we?
Yes.
Not the evidence of the research, it's the evidence of the legal fees that people can now see coming if they get this wrong. So money talks over and above the research.
The actuaries in the health system say the bottom line is your finances. They're the ones calling the shots for the health department over the next 20 years on this one.
That's right. And sadly, that has lagged far too long behind for many people who've been hurt by this process. Maybe we'll see a shift when the debate happens. Make sure you're part of it.
Well, we close today with, I don't think, two terrible issues in Australia that made the news around the world, and that's two stabbing incidents which resulted in multiple deaths. We often think of gun incidents resulting in that, but to think that a series of stabbings in a shopping centre would leave 6 people dead from one person doing the damage is appalling. And then that's followed up a few days later with the stabbing on live stream of a Christian leader by someone yelling out some inappropriate stuff, and a riot ensuing. What happened to peaceful Australia?
Oh, what happened to peaceful Australia? Saturday, late afternoon Saturday, I was just having to look on my phone and I saw a little news thing come up, and a news alert about an event in Bondi. I switched on the TV, and I don't know about you, I got flashbacks to watching the stuff going on in London, the bombings of London in 2007. Thankfully, nowhere near as bad as that, but it looks like a man aged around 40s, in his 40s, with mental health issues, and I think that's important for us to note. He went on what can only be described as a stabbing spree at the Westfield Bondi shopping centre. He managed to attack, I think, upwards of 10, 15 people before he was stopped, challenged, and pretty quickly shot by a police officer who happened to be nearby, an inspector who has been lauded widely as a hero. Other heroes, I think, are some of the people who tried to intervene and corral this guy as he was going around, and all the hoo-ha you can imagine around that. Lots and lots of false suggestions about what may be going on. It became pretty evident, I think, very early on. This one wasn't a religious one. When you saw what the guy was wearing, rugby league top. No reports at all from anybody about religious slogans that he was saying. Turns out now it was a guy, a schizophrenic, who'd been off his meds for a while, and this had taken a horrible turn. And then on Monday evening, an awful incident where a guy, just the neighbouring suburb to where I actually live, Steve, and that evening I heard a lot of sirens, I've got to tell you. A bishop in an Syrian Orthodox church, actually not quite so Orthodox, he's actually a Nestorian, so officially actually a heretic, but a popular... well, according to some orthodoxy, but a very popular local guy was preaching on a Monday evening service, and he was attacked inside his church building by a teenager, a 16-year-old young man, who leapt to the front and screamed out, "You have insulted the Prophet Muhammad." This bishop was well known for speaking out on a number of issues, including the nature of Islam, and stabbed him with what was a knife with a retractable blade that, thank God, retracted when he tried to stab him. So the injuries weren't anywhere near as bad as they could have been. That one definitely was a religiously motivated attack. That was very clear from the outset what was going on.
Wow.
Coincidental?
So there's friendly Australia. Yeah. I mean,
well,
the key? Yeah. That's an interesting question to ask, right? Because it feels like, the mental health issue. There are big issues in Australia for years about mental health. And it does feel like, to mix my metaphors, mental health issues in this level are a loaded gun about to go off, because there is such an extreme of it. But what is this other? Let me ask the question. Religious extremism. It wasn't from a family of extremists. They've got families in the Lebanese Christian and the Lebanese Muslim community in the same city. Is this going to inflame tensions? Because it seemed to on the night.
Well, it did on the night. I mean, what happened on the night was, having heard news of this attack, a large crowd of mainly Assyrian men from that Christian cultural background, I use that term deliberately, we'll talk about it in a moment, they came round and they demanded justice, and pretty instant justice. They were thirsting for it. They were screaming, an eye for an eye. And the ambos who'd arrived to tend to not only the bishop and a priest who got stabbed and a few others, but also the guy himself who picked up a few bruises in the fracas, they found themselves barricaded inside the church building and unable to get out. And the police actually ended up having to get the riot squad out to remove this crowd who, well, I mean, it's a very Assyrian, dare I say it, Middle Eastern response. It's a big pride and honor culture, and this is the way they deal with things. You've only got to look at what's going on in the Middle East at the moment with all the political, diplomatic tension there, just to see that sitting down and having a cup of tea is not how these things get sorted out.
So pride and honor.
Pride and honor.
Yeah. So that's interesting, because I noticed that the priest himself said that he forgave the young man. So pride and honor on one side, gospel forgiveness on the other. How does cultural Christianity and gospel Christianity, somewhere along the line, there's a blurring?
Well, there's the thing, I think, and I think it's really helpful for us then to be reminded that even an overtly Christian culture, and I got to say the Assyrians around me, the ones that are from that sort of Christian background, they are overtly Christian. There's crosses everywhere. I drive around at night and there's lit up sort of neon crosses on their houses. The tattoos at the gym of the guys at the gym are far bigger than mine. I've got a cross on my wrist. These guys put all that to shame. So they proudly have these crosses around, and yet not gospeled, not actually understanding what that cross is. And that was probably, I almost want to say, the most tragic thing that happened. I mean, it's awful that the guy got stabbed, but thank God he's okay. But what was tragic is to see a whole bunch of people who identify as Christian ultimately respond in an utterly unchristian way.
So what's a better response? What's the gospel response that, I mean, I'm sure many of the Syrian Christians will have a gospel response to it.
Absolutely.
But
absolutely.
What is the gospel response?
I want to say in this situation, twofold, and the Apostle Paul sets it out for us in Romans 12 and 13. And I'm indebted to the late John Stott for a sermon that he preached right after the 9/11 attacks more than 20 years ago, for setting out this framework so clearly. I just remember that sermon to this day. At the end of Romans 12, what does Paul say? In personal matters, we seek to forgive. We seek to live at peace with one another. He says very pithily, do not take revenge, friends, but leave room for God's wrath. God says, quoting from Deuteronomy, "It is mine to avenge. I will repay." So we can forgive and leave it to God, because we know that God will deal with things one day. God always is just, and of course, his justice is either executed, quite literally at times, or it's laid upon Jesus when someone comes in repentance and faith to him. But what my Assyrian friends possibly needed to be reminded of on Monday evening is that Paul doesn't end there. He goes into chapter 13. He talks about submission to the authorities. And then, very interestingly enough, having said that the magistrate, that is the civil ruler, is God's agent for protecting the good and punishing the bad, he then says he is the agent of God's wrath. So it could possibly be, and that's not a coincidence, having just said, leave room for God's wrath. So what those young men needed to hear is, one, it's not our job to deal with it. God has put in place civil authorities. If necessary, they will execute his wrath on this man. They will punish him. They will give him his just deserts. They will do it hopefully in a fairer way than the crowd baying for his blood. But of course, there is another courtroom. There is another place of punishment 2,000 years ago where we long for that young man who pulled out the knife, all those other young men around, all to know of that place of judgment, the cross of Jesus, which humbles all of us, brings us all to our knees, where we stop pointing the finger at each other and saying, "What are you doing wrong?" We have the finger pointed at us and we go, "I am just a sinner, save me." Wouldn't that just be a glorious thing to come out of this?
Yeah, and wrapping that up in the sense of everything today, imagine the kind of culture that is truly gospeled, dealing with how we live with our deep differences, dealing with the mentally ill, dealing with those who are struggling with identity issues, that the gospel can actually come in and soften us and change us and let us leave God to be the ultimate judge in all matters. That would be our confidence. And
it's
that's
needed
dual
in so many
citizens
areas.
supposed to do. Yeah,
dual citizens are supposed to do that. That's right. That's how we're meant to live. Well, that is the wrap up for another week of Dual Citizens. I've been David Ould.
And I'm Steve McAlpine.
And we'll see you soon again. Bye. Thanks for watching Dual Citizens. I'm David Ould.
And I'm Stephen McAlpine.
If you like what you've watched, please do subscribe. Maybe even just leave a review or some comments. Make sure other people can hear about it as well.
Because we need more friends.
We need lots more friends.
He needs more friends.